Please welcome to the stage Atlantic Media Chairman David Bradley.
Good morning and welcome. On behalf of Mike Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Aspen Institute and its CEO Walter Isaacson and my colleagues at The Atlantic, it's a pleasure to have you all here. Mike and Walter and I come from Washington and New York, so I thought I'd tell you a Washington story and a New York story. Washington story. I was flying back from Houston to Washington, D.C. late one night on, remember Continental Airlines? On Continental. We arrived so late that Continental didn't have baggage handlers, so about 60 of us ended up at the baggage carousel, just standing and waiting for over an hour. And there was one man who I thought was particularly interesting. Two things about him. He was avuncular and friendly, just winning, chatting with everyone. Second, it was the late Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Antonin Scalia. And so we end up, 15 of us, not getting our baggage, and in that line where you turn in your baggage claim slip, and Justice Scalia is one person behind me. So I turn to him and I say, rank should have its privilege, why don't you go ahead of me? And he says, no, not a problem at all, but let me come up and chat. And then he leans over and he says these words, if Continental Airlines ever comes before the Supreme Court, they're going to learn to regret this evening. Now a New York story. Son of a bookkeeper, well-educated, goes off to Harvard Business School and then moves to New York to make his fortune. Things go well at first. He becomes a partner at Salomon Brothers, but at age 39, in a larger layoff, he is let go. But it's a different kind of layoff. He's paid a severance of $10 million, which he uses to start a company. 10 years later, he is a titan. By age 59, he is the mayor of New York. And now he is the former mayor, the CEO of Bloomberg, one of the great media titans of our time, and a philanthropist of the scale of the Carnegies or the Rockefellers or the Mellons. I don't know Mike through his media work or through his corporation. I only know him through the philanthropic side. But there, he's really easy to admire. We are all effectively, either in whole or in part, a guest of Mike Bloomberg being here today. Do you remember the name Paul Tsongas, U.S. Senator, died of cancer? Right before he died, the New York Times assigned a reporter to do an obit interview with him. And he said, and they use this as the last quote in the Times obituary, when I'm down to the last cell in my body, it will be the one that wanted to be president of the United States. I don't know the analog for Mike, what he would want, but I think a lot of us would say at that moment, we'd observe, well, he was one of the most deeply generous men that we knew. So in any event, let me introduce Mike Bloomberg.
David, thank you. That was a little bit embarrassing, but I wish you'd gone on a little longer. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to CityLab. This is the conference's fourth year, and it's great to be here in Miami. When I walked outside this morning, I saw the beautiful weather, and I think, why did we wait 4 years to come here? Anyways, I did want to thank Miami Mayor Tomas Regalado for hosting us, and he is taking credit for the good weather. I know when I was mayor in New York and the weather was bad, I was blamed, although nobody ever gave me credit when the weather was good. And it's also great to have Mayor Regalado's predecessor, Manny Diaz, with us today. I also wanted to extend a special warm welcome to all of the mayors today, including those from Latin America and the Caribbean who are participating in Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's Challenge. Bienvenidos y buena suerte to all of you. The Aspen Institute and the Atlantic have been terrific partners for our team at Bloomberg Philanthropies, and I want to thank them, especially Walter Isaacson, who you're going to hear from in a few minutes, and David Bradley. They really did make this day possible, and Bloomberg Philanthropies is just honored to be partnering with them. Since the last time we met, the role that cities play in shaping the future, I think, has only grown clearer. Just 2 months after last year's CityLab, the world leaders came together in Paris and signed an ambitious agreement to address climate change I was there, and it was really an amazing thing to see. Perhaps the main reason the Paris summit succeeded where others have failed was that national governments finally recognized the progress that cities have been making. And it was much easier for them to commit to a major reduction in emissions when they're major cities, who incidentally are responsible for most of the world's emissions, were already taking bold actions on their own to reduce emissions. Cities are where the public lives. Roughly 50% of the world's population lives in cities. By 2030, 70% will live in cities. And I think it's also fair to say that generally federal, national governments have not done anywhere near as much as cities have done. Mayors are responsible to the public can get to them, the press follows what the mayors do, and when the public says, excuse me, I don't want to breathe dirty air, mayors have to respond. When the public says, I want to be proud of our city, mayors have to respond. And those of us that are lucky to have been or are mayors really have an enormous opportunity to make a difference in people's lives and perhaps save the planet. Nobody knows where climate change is going to end, but what we do know is we're seeing lots of things around the world that are really, they're really scary. Climate change is just one area where cities are leading with big and bold ideas, and this conference is a chance to highlight some of them and help bring new ones to life. And we do have an outstanding group of mayors and local leaders here today to do exactly that. We'll kick the conference off in a moment with a great panel led by Walter Isaacson. It's focused on an exciting new technology that has the potential to change the future of cities in ways that we can only begin to imagine today, and that's called autonomous vehicles or self-driving vehicles. Autonomous cars have once seemed like a futuristic fantasy, but the technology, as we know, is here already, and it's moving quickly. We've already had a few lawsuits about how it doesn't work. We've had some accidents, and that says that it's really being used, and like anything else, it's not perfect. The question is it an improvement over just having people behind the cars? And that's what you're going to talk about later on today. When you combine that technology with advances in mobile communications and the sharing economy, the possibilities really are unknown and probably limitless. But as we consider what impact that they will have on our lives, it's critical that the dog wag the tail and not the other way around. What I mean by that is over the past 100 years, I think it's fair to say no technology has done more to shape the life of cities than the automobile, in ways both good and bad. Cars gave city dwellers freedom and mobility and helped local businesses grow, but it has, as more and more people became car owners, elected officials began to redesign cities around the cars rather than the reverse. Cars, not people, started taking precedence in urban planning. The tail started wagging the dog. Some people even said that to bicycle riders, roads are for cars. Well, my recollection is that roads were built for horses and pedestrians before anybody else, and the cars came afterwards, so why they demand or should get preference, I'm not sure. But we have learned the hard way that if cities build to serve cars instead of people, people suffer. As air pollution from vehicles causes asthma and other serious health problems, traffic crashes kill more than 1.25 million people each year, and many of those deaths are in the world's cities. Congestion also is a major drag on our city's economy. It costs New York City more than $13 billion each year in higher prices and lost productivity. And to accommodate cars, cities have built highways that left some communities divided and isolated along economic lines. Many years ago, New York City built roads all around the city between the city and the waterfront. And the waterfront is an enormously important part of our economy and our social life. And ever since then, we've been spending billions and billions of dollars trying to solve the problem of being cut off, and there are no easy solutions to that. And of course, congestion. Congestion is a major contributor to our carbon footprint. In many of the world's cities, transportation is the single biggest source of carbon pollution, and most of it comes from cars. I will say, interestingly, that New York City is exactly the reverse. Because so many people walk and so many people take mass transit, it is buildings that have 80% of the, contribute to 80% of the pollution or generate 80% of the pollution and 20% from transportation, whereas in almost every other city in the world, it's exactly the reverse, 80% from transportation and only 20% from buildings. So if you can have mass transit and if you can build together tightly, concentrated, it really does make a difference. Now, there are many good reasons that cities around the world are trying to rethink their relationship with cars. They're returning streets to pedestrians and cyclists and reclaiming space for parks and plazas and other public areas. When we closed Broadway, one of the main thoroughfares through New York City a number of years ago, the screams were so loud you could hear them in California, I'm sure. But the truth of the matter is, it sped up traffic and it created an enormous pedestrian zone, which was phenomenal for our citizens, wonderful for tourism, and magnificent for property owners in the area because more people on the streets, the more people went into stores and bars and restaurants, so everybody really benefited. And those who complained about the driving eventually realized that it was no worse and in most cases was better without that one street which screwed up the whole traffic pattern in the middle of the city. In that case, it was the dog wagging its tail, and the same thing happened with bicycles. People screamed and screamed about bicyclists, and today in New York City, an enormous number of people ride bicycles, and the bicycle lanes have concentrated the cars into smaller lanes, and they have reduced traffic accidents significantly. Now along comes autonomous vehicles, and they have the potential to complement and accelerate the work that cities are doing, so long as people and not automobiles drive the agenda. I will say that has nothing to do with who's behind the wheel. It's just a question of whether or not who designs what, for whom. The possibilities are really extraordinary. I'm not sure whether they'll come to fruition, but you can just think about some of them. Autonomous cars have generated a lot of excitement because of their incredible promise for reducing crashes and saving lives. Obviously, a computer can do things better than a human being if it's well designed, simply because it doesn't take a coffee break and it doesn't lose attention. It's there all the time. If you don't like computers driving you, don't ever get in an airplane again, because for all practical purposes, as soon as you leave the ground until you touch down, everything is run by a computer, and that's why air travel is so safe. It is far and away the safest ways of moving people around that we've ever devised. Autonomous cars, however, can also give other benefits, and that we're only starting to grasp that. The theory is that they'll create new transit options that can connect people to jobs and opportunities and can help fight poverty. If autonomous cars accelerate the trend towards ride sharing, individual car owners may actually decline, which means city streets may require fewer parking spaces, which can be turned back to pedestrians and cyclists and businesses. And if people spend less time looking for parking spaces, pollution will decline and productivity will increase. It reminds me of the person who couldn't find a parking place, absolutely had to get a meeting, panics and says, "Oh God, please, please get me a parking space. If you get me a parking space, I will feed the poor. I will go to church every week. I will never swear ever again." And the guy drives around the corner and there's a parking space. And he says, "God, forget about it, I already found one." Anyways, the same thing was said when taxis were invented. Some intelligent entrepreneur many years ago created the taxi industry, and the follow-on today, Uber and 1,000 other apps exactly like Uber that are giving people the option of, another option of having somebody drive them around. If you remove the people behind the wheel and just have a computer there, the same thing will happen. A lot of people will have lost their jobs, and I think the question you really want to ask the panel today is, why is it different to have an autonomously driven car from having another person who does the same thing for you rather than you driving your own? Now, cities are already rolling out pilot programs to introduce driverless cars, and car companies and digital firms are eager to be a part of that work because it is a major new market for them. It is really quite amazing what you can do today in New York City if you want somebody to go to your house, pick up your cleaning, take it to the store, cleaning store, pick it up and bring it home, do it on a bicycle and charge it $20 for the whole thing, whereas one cab ride would cost more than that. You can already have that. It's another form of Uber. Uber has many forms. You can decide if you're going to be on the same street corner every day, every morning, there's a car that's coming down and it will pick you up. It will also pick up 3 or 4 other people, and you can split the cost. And it can be $5 or $7, $8 to do something that by cab would have cost you $20. And there's lots of competition in the autonomous driving vehicles coming along. There's certainly lots of competition in the what we'd call the taxi business. Cities are already rolling out programs to introduce driverless cars, and car companies and digital firms are eager to be a part of that work because it is a major new market for them. It will also disrupt their business model. If everybody started sharing cars, think what happens to the manufacturers of automobiles. They'll manufacture and sell an awful lot fewer cars. And so they're betwixt and between. They don't know what to do. Do they want to make cars that will drive themselves, as Elon Musk is doing? Or do they want to try to fight it and stall the inevitable as long as possible because that will keep their sales? Only history will tell how that works out and whether they made an intelligent choice. But at this critical moment, it really is important that we remember the lessons that the last century taught us. We have to make sure that the technology serves the people of our cities and not the other ways around. And we have to make sure that it helps to address existing problems, not creating new ones. After all, if people can spend time in a car doing things other than driving, traffic congestion may actually become less of a disincentive for people. And that could lead to more cars on the road, more congestion, and also more sprawl. So you're never sure how these things are going to play out, but one thing is for sure: technology is changing every part of our life, and some of it will be great for the consumer, but not for the providers, and some exactly the reverse. In addition, driving is a major industry. Taxis and trucks employ millions of people, and those jobs won't disappear overnight, but mayors do have to have a plan for a future where those jobs may decline. The truth of the matter, you're going to see the states defending the unions, some governments defending the unions, and the public on the other side of this. Unions will fight very hard to maintain their jobs and keep technology from displacing their members. And you see that in New York, where the governor just signed a bill outlawing or basically making it much more difficult for Airbnb to let people rent out their apartments and their houses. It's a great service for people who want to rent them out. They get some money. Great service for people who want to rent them. Nobody forces you to do it on both sides. Obviously, they think there's a benefit. But it clearly hurts the hotel industry, which in New York is represented by a union. And in the end, government will respond to those that help them get elected and reelected. And so the technology companies have to start to understand that and become much more players in the political space. The argument that it's better for society just doesn't cut it in the real world. And they're paying that price right now in New York City. I think it's true that any time there is a disruption in an industry, labor markets are affected, and the government has an important role to play, but it is going to be torn in 2 different directions, and how that turns out depends on who has the political savvy to go and rally the public behind them. All these challenges and opportunities that autonomous vehicles present really are local in nature, and mayors are the best positioned to explain these challenges and opportunities to the private sector, to form partnerships that improve private lives, to build public support for policies that put people first, and to fight those who want to keep the consumer, who is less organized than the providers in almost every case, keep them on the winning side. And that's why I believe it does make sense for mayors to lead the way on this issue, just as they have on so many others. Mayors are less weighted down by politics and ideology than the state and national governments, and in the end, mayors are the ones held most directly accountable for people's well-being. And this battle is the battle of the century, because technology is growing at an ever-increasing rate. The second derivative is positive, if you know what that means. What it says is there'll be more technology introduced into our society in the next 5 years than all the technology from Thomas Edison through today. Just think about that. We don't realize just how fast things are changing, but I think it's just an outrage that I only have 10 gigabytes of upload capacity today. 5-10 years ago, you didn't even have a cell phone. So things are changing, and we're going to have to respond to that. And I think autonomous cars or self-driving cars will be one of the most important changes that we're going to have to deal with. They clearly can make us safer. Just think of a seatbelt. Seatbelts were invented, and public officials sat back and did not have the courage to stand up and to say to everybody, wear your seatbelt, or we are going to give you a ticket, and you're going to have to pay a fine. And people said, can't tell me that I should wear a seatbelt. I have a right to kill myself. Well, maybe you do, but you don't have a right to kill somebody else or to increase the public's dependence on you and have to pay for your medical care. Remember, if you go back and look, the federal government didn't require seatbelts to be installed in all cars until 1968. And we didn't start requiring people to actually use them till 1984. And that's when New York passed the first law requiring seatbelt use, which has become prevalent, certainly throughout the United States and in some other countries. And just think about how many lives could have been saved if we had done that. We can't make a similar mistake with autonomous cars. And if the only thing that autonomous car technology accomplishes is putting people out of work and letting riders relax in the back of their seat without doing anything to improve safety and economic opportunity and reduce pollution, then it will be a major missed opportunity for our cities and our planet. And to help mayors make the most of this once-in-a-generation opportunity, I'm proud to say that Bloomberg Philanthropies has brought together a group of 5 outstanding mayors who have all shown strong commitment to innovation and to using technology in ways that improve people's lives. This group includes mid-size and large cities from both inside and outside the United States. And all these mayors recognize the potential of autonomous vehicles to transform cities. In the weeks ahead, 5 more global cities will join this group, and in partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Aspen Institute, this group of mayors will look at all of the areas that driverless technology can impact, and that includes transportation policy, land use and urban planning, workforce training, and infrastructure spending. And working together, we think they'll flesh out a picture of the different ways that this technology might change their lives and save the lives of their residents. And our foundation will help provide them with data and expertise to accelerate their work, creating policies around autonomous vehicles that they can then put to work in their individual cities. And then together we'll create a set of guidelines and best practices to help other cities prepare for this new technology and then work on spreading those lessons around the world. This reality is a global challenge shared by cities in every corner of the world. And the more that cities work together, the faster they can make progress. And the event of autonomous cars is one of the most exciting developments, I think, ever to happen to cities. And if mayors collaborate with one another and with partners in the private sector, they really can improve people's lives in ways that we can only imagine today. The only thing I would caution you is whatever we decide today is probably not what we're going to do tomorrow. And that's just the way change happens. But you have to go through each of these steps. So looking and seeing what's going to happen, identifying what the possibilities and the problems are, and having the courage to go face them, not just today, but tomorrow when new things come up is really what leadership is all about. It's leading from the front, and that's what we need our mayors to do, because the federal governments and state governments have shown that they really aren't capable of doing controversial things. It's the mayors that are willing to stand the heat, even though they are the ones that are most scrutinized by the press. I don't think there's any limit to what we can accomplish if we all work together. That's what CityLab is all about, and this new effort that we're leading around vehicles is very much in that spirit. And our foundation's government innovation program aims to support bold leadership, spur innovation, and to help other cities use data and evidence to solve problems. Preparing cities for autonomous vehicles is right at the intersection of all of these focuses. So I'm very excited to see the results in the months ahead. Thank you all for being here and for your outstanding work. All the best.